Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, partners, and friends. My name is Sharice Bimakwache, a researcher in climate justice and resource governance. And on behalf of the African Leadership Centre here at King's College London, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the official launch of the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship project titled Justice in Critical Minerals Governance and Energy Transitions, led by Dr. Clement Stepaniakou. Can we please get a round of applause? This project addresses one of the most urgent and least understood challenges of our time. How do we ensure that the global transition to clean energy is truly just? Not only technologically sound, but socially legitimate and equitable for the communities whose lands and lives are shaped by the extraction of critical minerals. As we confront a future driven by lithium, cobalt, copper, rare earths, and more, this fellowship turns our attention to the people, the stories, the silences, and the systems that make these minerals possible. The project brings together an exceptional consortium of partners across 3 continents. From Ghana, the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana and the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources will co-lead research and policy engagement in West Africa. From Chile, the Institute of Ecology and Biodiversity at the University of Concepcion will contribute deep expertise from Latin America's critical minerals landscapes. And from Australia, the Centre for Environmental Governance at the University of Canberra will help advance comparative insights from one of the world's major mining regions. Together, these institutions form a powerful global alliance to advance community-centered, bottom-up understandings of justice in energy transitions. This evening's programme reflects the layered complexity of that mission. We will begin with opening remarks situating the fellowship within the broader ambitions of the African Leadership Centre and King's College London. We will then move to our keynote address, which will examine the geopolitical and governance challenges surrounding critical minerals in Africa, followed by responses to the keynote, offering reflections from multiple perspectives. And after this, we shift gears to a panel discussion on bottom-up, indigenous, and arts-based methodologies, innovative approaches that help illuminate the voices, aspirations, and lived realities often missing from mainstream policy debates. Finally, we will conclude with closing remarks, drawing together the threads of the discussion and setting the tone for the work that lies ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, today's launch marks the beginning of a bold and timely conversation, one that is not only academic, but deeply human and urgently global. And again, my name is Sharice and I'll be the MC for tonight's event. Thank you for joining us in person and online to those across the world. Thank you also for your participation. And I will now hand over to Professor Eka Ipe, Director of African Leadership Centre and Professor of Development Economics in Africa, who will be giving the official welcome address for the night. Thank you.
Right, good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Eka Ipe. As Sharice has said, I'm Director of the African Leadership Centre and a professor here at the African Leadership Centre as well, King's College London. And it is my distinct honour to welcome you all to this second keynote event during this year's Africa Week. Now, this keynote event connects with this year's Africa Week theme, Resourcing African Agency, Priorities, Innovation, and Preparedness in a Multiple World. We consider the imperative of resourcing as simultaneously traversing material, ideational, institutional, and people-based concerns across 5 priority areas: collective agendas, natural resources, material resourcing beyond dependency, education and strategic infrastructure, and next generation Africans and preparedness. Now, the launch of the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship Project, Justice in Critical Minerals Governance and Energy Transitions, led by Dr. Clement Stefaniakou, speaks to the week's second priority area of natural resources. The project addresses a key concern of how diverse agencies interact with energy transition, and it surfaces and centers perspective through innovative and arts-based methods from key constituencies that are too often maligned in these conversations. In doing so, it engages with notions of agency at multiple levels. Now, I'm especially delighted to celebrate this success for an ALC Fellowship alumnus, as this shows that the Centre's commitment to building a next generation of thought leaders has come to fruition with Clement's success. I have to say, I see another amazing alumna on the list who is making waves in her own area of work, Dr. Kwesinachi Okafor-Young, pun intended as well, I should say. We're very delighted to hear from all the very highly esteemed speakers at this launch event. So I say again, I add my own welcome. The ALC and Kings welcome you all, and we're very grateful that you've taken time out from very busy schedules to be with us. Let me also acknowledge the presence of the keynote speaker, former Governor of Ekiti State and Minister of Mines and Steel, and visiting professor at the African Leadership Center here at King's College London, Professor Fine. And I acknowledge him because he speaks well of the ALC's commitment to intergenerational and impact-inspired knowledge exchange and cross-mentoring. And we're very grateful to you for all that you offered us in this regard. I welcome all our project partners who are present here across time zones. Dr. Monica Ortiz from the University of Concepcion in Chile, Professor Darren Sinclair from the University of Canberra in Australia, and Professor Akosiam Bofo at the University of Ghana. And I also acknowledge the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Mshai Mangola, another ALC mentor, and she evidences the wealth of the ALC's network of scholar artists that continue to work with us to push the research that we do in new directions. I'm very much looking forward to all that we will achieve together. Finally, I want to celebrate this collaboration, especially with the University of Ghana, as this project is also linked to the Africa-Europe Cluster of Research Excellence in Interdisciplinary Peace, to which King's and the University of Ghana become. With that, I hand over now to Professor Kathy McElwain, the Vice Dean for Research in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Public Policy, to welcome us on behalf of the faculty.
Thank you, Erica. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Kathy McElwain, and I'm the Vice Dean for Research for the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy. And I'm going to say a few words about how we came to select Clement to apply for this FLF, as we call it, a Future Leader Fellowship. So the first thing that I want to say is that these FLFs, as we call them, are one of our favourite schemes here in the faculty. And this is because mainly about their flexibility. They give generous time and resources for our most ambitious early career researchers to pursue their most ambitious ideas. We've had a number of them, and hopefully will continue in the future to have these in the faculty across multiple departments and a whole range of research areas. But because they are so attractive, perhaps not surprisingly, they prove to be very popular. This has meant over time that the funding body, the UKRI, has introduced what we call demand management. Basically, this means limiting the number of bids that any institution can submit. Given the size of King's, this has meant that we were, and continue, but in Clement's round, we were allowed to submit 8 candidates. But this is not just from the faculty, this is across King's as an institution. And as you can imagine, this is incredibly limiting given how many capable colleagues we have across the university. So my role as Vice Dean for Research is to make the final decisions about who we put forward in terms of our candidates. This is also with thanks to our departments, our schools, and especially our research development colleagues, 2 of whom are here tonight, David Newsom and Gil Toffel. And then also, in the past, I've also advocated in the King's selection panel for our faculty colleagues. So Clement's round was round 9, and there were 60 applications that got through at that stage. But each faculty could only put forward their top 3. So obviously, it often becomes a bit of a bum fight, but actually no, not in Clement's case. We were unanimous as a faculty, and the college panel was also unanimous. And this was partly about the project that we've heard a little bit about, but probably more importantly, I think in this case, about the candidate, about Clement himself. So why did we choose Clement? To illustrate this, I have a few quotations, some of which come from the faculty review stage and also other stages in the process. So about Clement's project, some of the words that were used were adventurous, ambitious but credible, strong potential to develop practical research leadership skills, methodologically sophisticated, strong impact and engagement potential. On Clement himself as a researcher, we had comments such as diverse intellectual and interdisciplinary background, commending the very clear and elaborate head of department supporting statement. And here I'd also like to underline the importance of Professor Eke Ikpe and colleagues in the ALC in this project success. And really, and we have a special term in the faculty for making the candidates FLF ready. And Clement was certainly that when he put forward his proposal. The King's panel itself agreed that the project was very ambitious, with a great range of methods and engagement with wider elements of the university. Finally, colleagues in our research development team who had worked with Clement on a number of smaller British Academy and internal pilot seed funding applications prior to being selected for this FLF, they commented on Clement's strong work ethic and dedication and his responsiveness to feedback. Other academic colleagues, such as Professor James Gow, who's a mentor to Clement, who's also here this evening, he noted on one of an earlier bid, "This is excellent, and I remain convinced that you should be looking on a larger scale. This FLF is that larger scale." Finally, another comment from our research development colleague noted how Clement would be great to work with on something as complex as an FLF. So the faculty couldn't be more delighted to be here this evening at the launch of this successful project. Thank you so much. I'd also like to hand over to Funmi Alonisakin, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Okay, sorry, not quite yet, Professor Funmi. Before we get to the music, very exciting segment, we'd like to first invite Clement himself onto the stage. Clement is the project leader, the principal investigator of this project titled Justice in Critical Minerals Governance and Energy Transitions. And Clement is lecturer in security development and leadership in Africa at the African Leadership Centre. Thank you, Clement.
Pressure is on. But thank you so much, Kathy, for those very kind words. Obviously, such a success can't be possible without just the environmental teams, the environmental ALC, and everyone here in the room, really, or the friendships and coffees we have together in the one we drink. So my fellowship, as has been said, focuses on a very specific aspect of the energy transitions, which is the critical minerals dimension of the transitions. And as we all know, we cannot achieve the decarbonization we want to achieve in the 2050, 2070 without the kind of technological advancement we need. And you can't have any of that without some critical, some minerals that have elements that are unique, and you can't just replace them. Of course, there's conversation about what critical minerals are and who defines them, but that's for another day. Today's discussion, we are assuming that there are critical minerals called critical minerals, and my project focuses on one of them, but many, I think that expands the scope. One of them called lithium, which we find across many countries. Now, when we talk about critical minerals, I'm sure by now it's household name. Everyone really knows something about critical minerals, but don't be too fast about it, because nowhere in the SDGs is critical minerals mentioned at all, or even minerals, or mining, or miners, nowhere. And that's very intriguing, isn't it? And that sustainable development goals were defined only 10 years ago. At the last COP30, there was a hassle, a real struggle to include critical minerals in the final communique, but it never got there, it was removed. And so even as we talk about critical minerals as an important part of the transitions, there is still not enough consensus around it. And so that's why we need to see this research and the project as really very critical for the transition conversation, to be sure we can have some movement around critical minerals, to be sure we can bring them back into the main frame around the energy transitions. And I thought this is important to this project out here. Now, I'm not just looking at critical minerals. I'm looking at a specific aspect of the governance of critical minerals, which is justice. When we talk about justice in the transitions and around the governance of critical minerals, there is not enough consensus around it. Of course, there are conversations around some dimensions of justice. Distributive justice is very popular. There is also procedural justice, which is popular, but then there's also the other dimension of recognition justice, and each of which looks at the allocation of resources equitably, inclusion of local voices in governance conversations and decision making, and then also recognition of local knowledge systems around the way decisions are made. All those are justice conversations. And in fact, yesterday I had a paper that also came out that another dimension of justice, which is looking at temporal justice, how time is valued or undermined in the governance of critical minerals at the very early stages of exploration. So this already tells you that a conversation on justice is ongoing, new, but there isn't really enough consensus around it. And that's why my project comes in. And even where you have some justice conversations, some elements of justice and conceptual development, often these are very localized in particular mining areas, or sometimes a bit too conceptual and really bringing in very high level conversations. Now, but that's where my project comes in, to bring about some novelty around the perceived justice. Now, the methodology is relying on what I'm calling hermeneutical ethnography. And so that ethnography is not just going to speak with people to understand how justice is defined or understood or how justice could be operationalized, but it's trying to look at existing knowledge systems from bottom up that are already there through movies, music, artifacts, anything at all in local communities where mining happens that can help us understand how people conceive and articulate their conception of justice. And that is one of the novelties I bring in. So I'm calling some of those knowledge systems, some of those data sources, silences and voices. So everything that's articulated and said through text, through voice is included, and then things that are not said but also expressed in several other ways are included. And so there are all kinds of silences and voices that I'm going to collect for this project. Now, in terms of the bigger picture, this is more like a theory of change. In the end, after collecting all those silences and voices, the idea is to work with partners in Chile, Australia, and Ghana to create a certain co-creation of understanding of justice with communities where mining happens in China, Chile, or Australia, to be sure that we can have a certain consensus built from bottom up around what justice means. But the end game is twofold. Of course, there are some pathways to impact that I'm looking at, but eventually, the idea is that communities where mining happen have some kind of prosperity happening there so that they are not too exploited, but also that the global supply chain of critical minerals is not as impacted as it could be if communities are not included in the conversations around critical minerals governance. I have some timelines. It's a 4-year project. I can extend it to 7 years if I want after the 4th year, and the objectives around that. The project, this is me in the middle. I have mentors here at King's. I have 16 members to work with, 3 here at King's and 3 in the project countries. I'll form a team of mentoring, I call it mentoring and advisory team of experts. Many of you in the room here, Osatumi, Eka, James Gow, many other people will be on that panel. And then I work with the partners. The idea is to read the bigger picture, make sure critical minerals are part of that conversation of the future of sustainable development goals, but also global UN conversations, but also transnational conversations of the energy transitions. And that's why today's discussion, and I'm ending, thank you. I've exceeded my time by 2 minutes, but I've done well. So today's lunch is in 3 parts, basically. The first part is the keynote that will follow with the key part. My talk is just blabbing on. So the key part in the keynote on critical minerals, delve into that conversation. There will be the methodology section that also touches on the key part of my project. And then the third bit is all of us being engaged to have a conversation to be sure that we can go home enriched and be part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
I am so impressed with that timekeeping, Clement. I know you have to talk about this project. I know it's a very fascinating thing for all of us, to be honest. So can you please help me give Clement another round of applause? And I trust many of us, as you've been listening and drawing fascinatingly into the work that we do day to day, and with our reading and been formatting and formulating questions in the back of your minds already. But now I would like to invite to the stage Professor Funmi Olomishekin, Vice President, International Engagement and Service at King's College London. Professor Funmi will be introducing and chairing the keynote session organized. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shiris. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce this next part of this evening because this is the keynote. And the keynote speaker holds a special place in the life of ALC Kings. Professor Kayode Fayemi is not just visiting professor at the African Leadership Center at King's College London and a distinguished scholar practitioner in governance, civil military relations, democratization and security sector reform. He's also an alumnus of King's College, London, having received his PhD from the Department of War Studies. Many of you know that he had an illustrious career as a policy academic before he went on to become governor of Ekiti State and thereafter to become minister for minerals, for solid minerals, in Nigeria, and returned to Ekiti State to become governor for a second term. So his career is such that he has seamlessly connected policy and practice and academic scholarship with decision making in real life. The experience he brought, and he actually was the first minister of solid minerals in Nigeria and had to put in place many of the policies that you see today and got to the bottom of the kinds of challenges we have when it comes to energy transitions and the sorts of injustices and the economic exploitations that go on in the background of all of this. Not only does he have a lot to say on this, I should say that his history with the African Leadership Center is long-standing. Right from the beginning, he's been a mentor on our fellowship program and has been one of the leading researchers in contributing to the knowledge base at the African Leadership Center. Just to say, a little bit about his long, illustrious career. It spans extensive advisory work with governments across Africa on transitional justice, regional integration, security governance, and constitution making. He was the main technical advisor to Nigeria's Human Rights Violations Investigation Commission, the Oputa panel. If you understand Nigeria's history under the military regime and the transitions, and the transition that led to successive civilian regimes from 1999. The work of the Oputa panel was central to this. He's done that at the national level, but he's also contributed to expertise at the regional and global level. At ECOWAS, supporting ECOWAS, UN, ECA, the OECD. If you know the famous publications at the time, for those of us who work on security sector reform, the OECD publication on security systems reform, long before he went on to become governor, was one that he contributed to as one of the leading authors, and the British government's Africa Policy Advisory Panel. So beyond academia, he's held major public offices. I talked about his ministerial position as Minister for it says here mines and steel development. I think it's solid minerals, if I'm not mistaken, but you can correct me when you get here profiling. He's been chairman of Nigeria's Governors Forum and president of the Forum of Regions of Africa, in addition to his being 2 times governor of Ekiti State. Now, his academic life includes appointments with the National Defense University in the US and Northwestern University, where he was associate professor. He's a prolific author. He has published widely on governance, democratization, and security sector issues, synthesizing scholarly insight with lived political experience. And I think that's why he was the one that was chosen to give the keynote here today. The ALC is very privileged to have a global community of scholars and practitioners. That is why our PhD scholars, postdocs, everyone interacts seamlessly with people who have deep knowledge of the issues, both in terms of policy and practice. So it gives me great joy to welcome you here to give the keynote. Please welcome Professor Kayode.
Thank you, Professor Olanishaki. Good evening. Vice President Olanisha King, the ALC Director, Professor Ekwe, and the Assistant Principal is here, who is also a Nigerian, as many of you may know, Professor Bukout, and the Vice Dean, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to deliver this keynote at the launch of the new Justice in Critical Minerals Governance and Energy Transitions project, led by Dr. Clement Sefan Yako. We've heard about the project. The Vice Dean has told us the selection process, and I really want to start by congratulating you. Oh, I forgot to say hello to James. I haven't seen James in how many decades now? My remarks will focus on critical minerals, energy transition, and the future of resource governance in Africa, with one main question in mind: who benefits, who bears the costs, and who decides? Let me begin with a paradox. By most estimates, Africa holds the key to the global energy future. The World Bank notes that 30% of the world's mineral reserves lie beneath African soil. From the copper and cobalt belts of Central Africa to the lithium and platinum fields of the South, from manganese and graphite to the gold, bauxite, and aluminium of the West, the continent sits at the center of the world minerals map. It holds about 70% of the global cobalt reserves, 80% of platinum, 40% of known gold reserves, alongside major deposits of manganese, graphite, and lithium. International Energy Agency projections indicate that demand for several of these minerals will rise more than fourfold by 2040. What this simply means, if we're to focus on the minerals that Clement and his team are interested in, is that the world cannot go green without first going African. And yet, when I travel through mining communities in my own country, Nigeria, I see despair and despondency. I see children walk miles for water from streams contaminated by lead and tailings. I see young men in artisanal pits with pickaxes and no protective gear, extracting minerals for technologies they will never use. Only 2 weeks ago, 38 artisanal miners died from gas in an underground mine in Zurich. Zurich is a mineral-rich plateau state of Nigeria. In many places, the school is a crumbling shack, while trucks of ore move to the coast. This contrast captures a deeper problem. We are rich in minerals on the continent, but poor in governance and development. We are indispensable to the global economy, yet disposable within it. As Stanford academic Terry Linkell once observed about oil booms and petrol states, this is the paradox of plenty. We cannot afford to repeat that history, and I believe that's why Clement has decided to focus on the justice aspect of energy transition. Energy transition must not become another resource cost. But how do we really move beyond this paradox that often frames the story of African resources? The global political economy is undergoing a transformation comparable in scale to the 19th century Industrial Revolution. Driven by climate change and clean energy technologies, it has placed Africa at the center of the new geopolitical context. Energy transition and decarbonization are now embedded in industrial strategy, national security, and economic planning. Electric vehicles, renewable power, batteries, and hydrogen are expanding rapidly, and the transition And the transition is mineral intensive. It depends on lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, manganese, graphite, rare earths, and platinum group metals, resources in which Africa is exceptionally endowed. The central question is whether this will produce a green transition that supports structural transformation or a new phase of extraction. When I assumed office as Minister of Mines in Nigeria, 11 years ago now, yes, one reality that dawned on me incredibly early was that our policies were designed for extraction, not for development. We measured success in tonnage. We celebrated volume, not value. We congratulated ourselves when mining companies renewed their licenses. But what is a ton of lithium worth when it leaves African soil? Perhaps a few $1,000s. What is that same ton worth when it returns to us inside a battery? Tens of thousands, perhaps. What is it worth when it is inside an electric vehicle in Lagos or Nairobi? More still. We've been selling the raw material and buying back the finished product at 10 times the price, if not more. This is clearly not trade. This is a tax on our own poverty. We cannot mine lithium in Zimbabwe, ship it to the Americas or Asia, watch it become battery, and then borrow money from the World Bank to buy electric buses. That is paternalism and dependency dressed up as the global trade. And that was what we sought to address when I started as minister in the roadmap for the growth and development of the Nigerian mining industry in Nigeria. Renewed global attention, therefore, presents both opportunity and risk. Major powers are reorganizing supply chains through industrial policy and strategic partnerships. The United States has adopted the Inflation Reduction Act and recently convened a minerals ministerial. The European Union has its Critical Raw Materials Act. China has secured long-term positions across the continent, and even middle powers such as the United Arab Emirates and Turkey are increasingly active on the African continent. These moves are legitimate and rational responses to technological and climate imperatives, but they raise a structural question about Africa's collective negotiating position. The danger is that Africa becomes the arena in which others compete. It's almost a return back to 1884, 1885. The only difference is that these are not colonials sitting at the table in Berlin and drawing up what belongs to who in Africa. But we have seen this pattern before. Previous commodity booms in gold, cocoa, rubber, and palm oil generated extraction without transformation, weak revenues, and external value capture. If the same structure persists, global decarbonization could coincide with local deindustrialization. Avoiding this outcome requires a shift from an extract and export model to one centered on value addition, technology transfer, regional integration, and transparent governance as core conditions of engagement. Interestingly, Africa is not without a blueprint. The African Mining Vision, produced by African mines ministers and adopted by heads of state in 2009, anticipated many of the current challenges and set out a model for using mineral resources to drive broad-based and inclusive development. So, Clement, it may not have been in the SDG, but African leaders had actually been thinking and working on this much earlier. It emphasized linkages between extraction and industrialization, local content, skills formation, beneficiation, environmental stewardship, and democratic accountability. Only last year, the African Union's African Green Minerals Strategy builds on this foundation by prioritizing resource-based industrialization through backward linkages in local supply chains and forward linkages in processing and manufacturing. The scale of the opportunity is significant. The African Development Bank estimates that moving from the export of rare earth concentrates to domestic smelting and refining could increase the market value of Africa's minerals by up to 75% by the year 2040. Recent policy shifts across the continent already indicate a move in this direction. Export restrictions on unprocessed minerals, regional value chains under the African Continental Free Trade Area, and initiatives such as the recent DRC Zambia battery project all point to a stronger focus on value addition. The commitments of the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg in November 2025 on financing and supply chain reform also recognize the strategic importance of Africa's role in critical minerals development, although their impact will depend on implementation and on whether they deliver technology transfer, fair financing, significant participation in high-value segments of production. In the past year, a move away from the long-standing model of raw mineral exports towards a more assertive form of resource nationalism has emerged in many countries. Zimbabwe's ban on raw lithium exports has attracted major investments in domestic processing, including a $400 million lithium sulfate plant by a Chinese firm, Zhejiang Oyu Cobalt, which is scheduled for production in 2026, the year we're in now. Nigeria's restriction on raw ore exports have been followed by the launch of a high-purity refinery in Lagos and a $600 million lithium processing plant in Nasarawa State in north-central Nigeria. Namibia, Gabon, Ghana, Mali, Zambia, and Niger have adopted similar measures to increase local participation and secure more equitable commercial terms. At the same time, major powers are reorganizing supply chains through industrial policy and strategic partnerships. The implication is that individual national strategies will have limited bargaining power, whereas coordinated action can convert resource endowment into industrial capacity. Mineral processing requires, for example, reliable power and transportation, yet extraction often takes place in regions without electricity or modern logistics. Linking mining licenses to investments in energy and shared infrastructure, such as we have witnessed in the Simandou project in Guinea and the Lobito Corridor and Tazara Rail links connecting the mines of Zambia and the DRC to coastal ports, offers a practical route to align resource development with long-term economic transformation. This brings me to Clement's issue, justice in energy transition. The question raised by Dr. Sefa Nyako's research is what justice should look like in this context. And we often speak about climate justice and the rights of future generations. I think we must also speak about the rights of those who live today in and around mining communities. Critical minerals are at the intersection of climate policy, industrial strategy, geopolitics, and security, and their governance depends on strong regulatory institutions, transparent licensing, credible contract negotiation, effective revenue management, and reliable technical knowledge. But it also requires environmental and social safeguards, grounded in local realities and sustained regional coordination, since fragmented national approaches weaken bargaining power. Justice begins with the way mineral wealth is used. It should support industrialization, skilled employment, technological upgrading, and domestic enterprise through local processing, downstream industries, and fair fiscal returns that are reinvested in development. Additionally, justice is environmental and social. Decarbonization elsewhere cannot be built on economic damage and public health costs in Africa. Responsible mining requires firm regulation, transparent monitoring, and rehabilitation that protects land, water, biodiversity, and human health. From my experience, Justice is also intergenerational responsibility because African critical minerals are also finite resources. Hence, transparent revenue systems and sovereign wealth mechanisms are needed to convert temporary rents into long-term investments in infrastructure, education, and in innovation. At the global level, a just transition requires Africa to move from the position of raw material supplier to that of a strategic partner in technology, value addition, and industrial development. There is also a peace and security dimension to the justice question. In fragile and conflict-affected settings, mineral wealth does not exist in a political vacuum. Where governance is weak, institutions overstretched, and economic opportunities limited, the rapid expansion of mining can often intersect with local grievances, informal economies, illicit trade networks, and in some cases, armed actors. Many of us are aware of what is going on in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Competition over high-value minerals has intersected with armed group financing and regional instability. In the Sahel, the rapid expansion of artisanal mining has created parallel economies that operate beyond effective state regulation, and in some cases enable smuggling, tax evasion, and the movement of armed groups across porous borders. In northern Mozambique, resource discoveries have intensified pre-existing grievances. In my own country, Nigeria, there are lessons on the security risks associated with weak mineral governance. The expansion of illegal and informal mining across several states has generated environmental degradation, revenue losses, community conflict, and the growing involvement of organized criminal networks. Indeed, in parts of the northwest of Nigeria, illegal gold mining has been linked to banditry and the financing of armed groups. In other words, competition over land and resource access has aggravated communal tension in many countries on the continent. Mining governance is therefore inseparable from human security, state legitimacy, and public trust. But beyond accidents and enforcement failures, poorly governed mining carries severe environmental and public health consequences. Nigeria's lead poisoning crisis in Zamfara state demonstrated how unregulated artisanal mining can devastate entire communities, especially women and children. And across the continent, contaminated water, degraded farmland, and the loss of traditional livelihoods fuel resentment towards both operators and the state. And as the global rush for critical minerals accelerates, these risks will grow imminently. Let me round up. Whether African critical minerals become a pathway to justice and transformation or another cycle of extraction and dependency will be determined less by geology or markets than by leadership. The energy transition is global in scope, but its developmental outcomes will depend on governance, strategic clarity, and the willingness to act in the long-term public interest. This moment is therefore a test of agency. For decades, engagement with global resource markets has been largely reactive. Today, the scale of external dependence on African mineral endowments creates a leverage, an opportunity that did not exist in earlier commodity cycles. Converting that leverage into industrialization, value addition, and technological upgrading requires coordinated and purposeful leadership. And leadership would also require political courage and institutional depth. No single country can capture the full value of complex mineral supply chains, which makes regional frameworks such as the African Continental Free Trade Area essential for scale and bargaining. There's therefore a global imperative as much as an African one. The resilience of the energy transition will depend on partnership based on transparency, mutual benefit, and shared prosperity. African priorities such as industrialization, sustainability, community welfare, and sovereign stewardship of resources are the foundation of stable and ethical supply chains. And one critical example to give, 600 million out of our 1.4 billion population in Africa without electricity. Yet, in many of these mineral corridors, there's even no electricity to power residential living, not to talk of heavy-duty mineral extraction. So it shouldn't be difficult for those who want to benefit from Africa's critical minerals to concede to that trade-off. You want our minerals, you produce the infrastructure. We negotiate the pricing, and we engage in what will benefit the local communities where these minerals are extracted from. If this movement is seized with vision, leadership, and courage, I'm convinced that Africa will shape the future. Thank you.
Please take a seat.
Oh, you want?
Yeah, yes, please. Because we will now listen to the discussants. I'll join you there in a moment. We have two discussants online. And I'm going to call first from Professor Kosua Adomako Agbofo. I hope you will bring her. Very good. Hi, Kosua. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I wasn't sure if you had said go or whether I was waiting for something else.
I wanted to hear you first. We can see you.
Great.
If you could demo pin, yes, we can see you. Excellent. Good to see you, Akosua. Can I
Good to hear you. I can't see you, but good to hear your voice as always.
All right, I'll come on stage shortly, but we can see you. Please spend 5 to 6 minutes responding to what you just, the keynote you just had. Thank you. Over to you. I think she's frozen.
Network.
Okay, can we? Yes, she's in Ghana at the moment, is she? Okay, we're going to try to see whether we can bring Dan in and try again with Akosua. Is somebody in touch with her?
You back?
Is she back?
She's back. Yeah.
Akosua, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm experiencing the conditions that Professor Kayode was speaking about, and I'm not even living in a mining community.
Amazing. Okay, let's hear you quickly before the network does its thing. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. A big aiko to Clement, and thank you, Professor Femi Kayode, for your remarks, which were very insightful and helpful. I've been asked to comment, so I will pick and choose because both for a matter of time and because of my own, leanings and inclinations. Professor Kayode started by asking certain questions, and I will repeat them and then add to those questions. They were important questions. He asked about who benefits from critical minerals. He asked who bears the cost and who decides. I guess the decides was both about who decides about the benefits, who decides about the costs, who decides about the location, who decides about how they are transported, where they are extracted from, and so on. And I want to pose maybe it's a prior question, which is what is a critical mineral and for whom is it critical? Because we know, of course, what a critical mineral is in this room. We know that it's needed for our technology. We know that it's needed for all the wonderful gadgets and maybe not so wonderful gadgets that we use. It's also important in weapons and killing people. And we need to ask also, when we talk about justice in climate and mineral governance, and we talk about communities and governments and governance and industry, what do we mean by those? I'll come back to Prof's comments in a moment, and I just want to read something from the US Energy Act of 2020. And I read the US's act because subsequent remarks that I will make will explain this better, and it will not be a surprise to anybody in the room. So the US Energy Act of 2020 defines a mineral as quote unquote critical if it meets three conditions. One, it is essential to economic or national security. Obviously, their economic or national security. Its supply chain is vulnerable to disruption. Okay, so they are recognizing that the conditions that we know of in the Niger Delta, Delta in Nigeria, if you like, what goes on in the DRC, if you like, what goes on in some of our in Ghana, if you like, would be a threat to what rich industrializing countries need these minerals for. And the third condition that the US Energy Act refers to is it performs a function in manufacturing that cannot be replaced without serious consequences. Whether higher costs for key technologies, slower deployment of clean air, risks to the Prof's question about benefits for whom, challenges for whom, security issues for whom, because clearly the farmer who's losing his or her farm does not see this lithium inability to move in the supply chain as critical. In fact, the reverse is true for the farmer who is losing his or her land. And let me just give a quick example from the Ghanaian situation on lithium to speak to that. We know that Atlantic Lithium, which is an Australian project, was seeking a 12-year lifespan for its activities in Ghana to turn Ghana into one of Africa's top lithium producers. Last we had a change of government, and last year the government decided that they were going to put a pause on this process. The company, an Australian company, has indicated that if this process does not go forward, in fact, let me just backtrack. What the Ghanaian government decided was that the contract needed to be reviewed and to indicate payment not in terms of a future the mineral should not be sold into the future at a flat rate, and that there should be built into the contract an opportunity for the pricing and the benefits, to go back to Prof's comment, to reflect what is happening on the world market. The Australian company have used language that suggests that the slowing down of the process will have certain consequences and implications. And from where I'm sitting, it sounds very much like a veiled threat. In the meantime, for 3 years, farmers whose lands have been taken for this project are sitting and waiting. They have not been compensated. They want to know what is going to happen to them. Prof also talked about the fact that Africa holds the future, right? So this criticalness of the minerals for other people is like on our soil. He did not use the word colonialism, but he did talk about the Berlin Conference. And so the risk for us here, which is very real, is a new colonialism that sits on the horizon. In talking about the way forward, he mentioned regional integration and laid a lot of store by our governments and our governance systems, and talked about industrialization, all of which are true, cannot be disputed with. But we cannot move forward with industrialization, which in my country, Ghana, we've been talking about for eons, if we have a core of young people who are not educated for the process of industrialization. He also talked about partnerships. How are we going to engage in these partnerships? And I will probably conclude here, or my penultimate comment on partnerships, to look at the strategic partnerships, for example, that the US has engaged in with Canada and with Australia, in contradistinction to the partnerships that you would have hoped would come out of, you know, the systems. I don't know what the right word is, but the AU, African Mineral Strategy, and some of these other strategies. And I want to put on the table also the Women in Mining Strategy for 2025 to 2030, which seeks to make sure that women are involved in governance in the mineral sector. But to go back to this partnership between the US, Canada, and Australia, we live in a world, when we woke up this week, we realized that there was a new war going on. Multilateralism seems to have been dealt, at least, if not a death knell, at least a very, very severe wound. We see that the one way to go is becoming the order of the day. And I think that we need to bring this conversation about the threat to multilateralism onto the table, because without a multilateral framework, conversations about partnership are not going to happen. And I am not at all sanguine about these big players and how they will just bully us into our spaces. Final comment that I want to make is just to say that we have seen this before. We have seen it with all the minerals on the continent. Prof told us that Africa is the future and it's sitting under our soil. In Ghana right now, we are suffering an ecocide because of not only illegal gold mining, but also the legal mining sector, which is irresponsible, which is not resuscitating the land, which is not paying the right tariffs, and so on. So I hope that as we talk about justice, which is core to what this project is about, we will come back and look at all the key areas that were mentioned today, so that our governance systems and our partnerships will not take us the route of Wakanda in the Black Panther, where in order to make sure that that Wakanda did not die, they had to hide vibranium from the rest of the world. And we need to live together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Kosua, thank you so much. I hope you could hear people clapping in the room. Please stand by. And I will now call on Professor Darren Sinclair, who's a leading scholar of environmental regulation, governance, and occupational health and safety regulation in the mining sector. I should also say to you that Professor Kosua is a leading African feminist scholar, filmmaker, and advocate for decolonizing knowledge, a professor of African and Gender Studies at the University of Ghana. Professor Sinclair, welcome. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
We can hear you. We can hear you well. Please, over to you. Try to spend 5 to 6 minutes, but I know that my colleagues gave you up to 10 minutes. But we will claw back some time, or at least close at that point of 10 minutes too. Please proceed.
Thank you. And I'll try and keep my comments fairly brief in the interests of time. So I just want to thank Professor Faima for a rich and thought-provoking address, and also Professor Ampamfo for her response, which was equally thought-provoking and timely given current world events. Can I just first acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm presenting here in Australia, and also to congratulate Clement and the rest of the team at KCL, and also the other research teams in Ghana and Chile on this project, and we look forward very much to working with you over the next few years. A couple of things struck me from Professor Faima's presentation. First was the heart-wrenching description of the despair he saw on the faces of those located in the communities. I think it was in Nigeria you mentioned. And it made me think about the fact that those most negatively impacted by extractive mining, in this case critical minerals, what we're talking about here today, are often those that benefit the least and have the least say in the mining operations. And that brings me to a second point, which I think was an important truth underlying Professor Fahima's keynote address, and that is this, that the adoption of unjust extractive model of mining is not inevitable. It is, in fact, a choice. The governance arrangements overseeing can bend towards a just transition for all, not just another phase of extractive mining or colonial mining, as we've heard mentioned, that is conveniently ignored in the moral imperative to achieve a transition to a lower carbon economy. But it's a choice that is often made far from those impacted communities in the corridors of power and finance of the global north. In this context, this particular project is an important reminder that we need to focus our attention on empowering local communities that have a say in and benefit from critical minerals, not just during a transient commodities boom, but through long-term distributed and appropriate benefits. As I understand it, this project is going to focus on the vexed and under-examined issue of the fact that those very minerals that are needed to solve the climate crisis, and remember, the impacts of climate crisis are not equally distributed around the world. They will be most felt in the regions closer to the equator, for example. But in the rush towards the technologies and the processes that will help solve that problem and bring about a low carbon economy, they risk replicating the very extractive injustices that have long defined the relationship between the global south and global north. And I must admit, just as an aside, I always find it strange, that terminology, the global north and global south, given that in Australia we do live in the south. And in fact, if you look at Africa itself, the equator goes right through it, and half of it's in the geographical south and north. Be that as it may. But anyway, as Professor Fahima noted, this is not merely an ethics problem, it's a governance design problem. It's the energy transition itself. It will not be is not something that happens just by default. It has to be designed and worked on to be a just transition. Unfortunately, the existing frameworks, be those international or national mining codes, ESG standards, multilateral compacts, as we just heard discussed, tend to treat communities as stakeholders to be consulted, not as rights holders with genuine agency or power to shape events and outcomes. Genuine community participation, particularly for disadvantaged and Indigenous communities, remains aspirational in most jurisdictions. And national level policies or multilateral level policies can often mask or gloss over local variation in who bears the costs and who captures the benefits. In closing, I'd just like to say that this project matters because it's seeking ways to empower community voices in the mining of critical minerals, and that's a genuine contribution to the clean energy transition. The multicultural design of participants, Ghana, Chile, and Australia, is valuable precisely because it enables comparison across very different governance contexts and political economies. Here at the Centre for Environmental Governance at the University of Canberra, we're very excited and enthusiastic about participating in this project and look forward to working with our partners. Noting that getting the governance right is inseparable from getting the climate transition right, and that's a point worth repeating. So congratulations again to Clement and all those involved, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Well, Prof. Sinclair, thank you so much. You saved us quite a bit of time as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your comments. Please stand by because I would really ask for a couple of comments. Does somebody have the mic over there? Yes, thank you. Can I see a show of hands if anyone has a critical question on critical minerals? If someone has a critical comment as well, please let me get a sense, and I will take 2 or 3 together so that we give our colleagues time. Thank you. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. Iso, I see you there.
Good evening, Amit.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Do you want to take this mic? Take this. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good evening. A student here at the ALC. I was just wondering, if the minerals are critical to one part of the equation, does that also imply it's critical to the other? And if it is, then who gets to set the price and who gets to pay? Thank you.
Excellent. Please pass that round instead. I'll try to use this. There's one person on this side. Okay, and I see Sophie's hand up, and then we leave it at that. I don't see any more hands, but I'm trying to.
Matthew Bonilo. The professor from Ghana says something about the death of multilateralism, and then Professor Kayode also mentioned the fact that different stakeholders are already coming up with a framework. But I just want to draw attention to the United Nations 7th Environmental Assembly in December of 2025, which also tried to come up with a framework, a non-binding framework for critical minerals that talked about justice. So the question is that how do we, harmonize? Because for those of us who are from third world countries, who are the focus of this, we seem to see that it's through the multilateral framework that will be our interest can be preserved. So how do we keep into this kind of framework coming from the United Nations that is that?
Thank you so much. It's been a while since I heard the use of the phrase third world. Thank you. Sophie, let's be quick. Sophie, are you desperate for that last question? Very right.
Hi, my name is Sophie Tegang, and I'm a fellow at the ALC. Whenever we talk about a lot of the issues in Africa, we reference bad governance and we say that we need to get past that, and that's the reason why we're still stuck in some of these patterns that do not serve us. And yesterday I asked one of the keynote speakers, okay, so why don't African countries come together and set price ceilings or set floors so that when external actors come to trade with us, they can't just extort us? And the response was that, oh, it's hard to align everybody's motivation. It's hard to get all countries to agree to something altogether. And I find that that is just a diplomatic way of saying that a lot of our leaders were self-interested. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to be protecting all of the continent to protect at least your country. So I'm wondering now, what are the practical steps that we can take to circumvent this bad governance? Because I'm honestly tired of that being the end all. That's always the excuse at some point. So now how do we get past that? Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. I'll allow your question very quickly, yes.
Thank you very much, professors, for your time. I'm Jonathan. I work in social surveying on mine sites across Africa and the communities which abut them. My question is, sort of when you go into these sites and you look at the targeted solutions, for example, with an artisanal gold mine, the community doesn't trust the government, the NGO, the mining company who's coming in to give them the solution. So when you have a deficit of trust in a targeted government solution, how do you build a bridge between the intervention and the local community? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. And I'm sorry, I have to close it now. I really apologize. Yeah? Can I read them? Can you read them out? Why don't you read them out? Yeah.
I'll read one from, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Omoaholo Owakalen, who is the Executive Director of Citadel School of Government. And they ask, what is the strategic objective of the regional integration recommendation by Professor Kayode Fayemi? Is it to foster inter-African trade in and processing of these critical minerals, or to give Africa a unified and amplified voice in negotiations with the rest of the world around these minerals. Whatever it is, the latter or the former, or both, what are the prospects and challenges of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in achieving an integrated governance of these minerals?
Thank you. Professor Fayemi, do you want to take a stab very quickly? We will close this session in 9 minutes.
Okay.
So please, and I want to give 1 minute each to the two profs discussant.
Well, my voice can project, but I think for people who are online,
yeah, and actually this mic works
actually,
as well.
no.
The one in front of you.
Oh, okay, this works.
Yeah, that works.
Oh,
yes, it does.
Okay. Quite number of interesting questions. The first, who gets to set the price and who gets to pay? Ms. William, you've asked a pertinent question, and I think there are models that can guide us. Even the Africa Mining Vision that I referred to as a framework. The problem is the gap that exists between framework and execution. Africa is not short of ideas and approaches. At the G20 summit in Johannesburg, the mining ministers had a session. They had their own network chaired by the South African minerals resources minister. And one of the agreements they reached was, look, if we insist on lithium processing, and we have lithium in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, just as an example, why do we need to go into negotiation independently? Why can't we pool the resources just as petroleum countries did with OPEC? And they determine what happens on pricing. When there's a glut in the market, they reduce supply so that they don't suffer the consequences of that glut. There's no reason why that cannot be extended to the solid mineral setting, for example. But in doing that, it's not just something that has to be done at the level of government. When I was minister, one of the things we tried to do with our mining leases and licenses was to insist that there must be a community equity, if you like. And they can then set up their own cooperative or institutional arrangements. And we set up for gold in the northern part of Nigeria, we set up what we call the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining Initiative. We add mineral buying centers for artisanal miners who collect these things. They don't even know the value. And Chinese operatives, other non-state actors come, take it from them, give them peanuts because they don't even appreciate what they have. And there has to be a framework that enables knowledge and then guides pricing, so that pricing is not just determined by those who are taking the minerals out, but also by those who own the minerals and on whose land you extract the minerals from. So I think the question about frameworks by user, there's so many frameworks. And the principle that guides many of those frameworks also recognize ownership, community ownership, accountable governance, transparency. All of those fancy principles are embedded in those various initiatives. But implementation and execution is often a challenge. And we've become slaves to that principle we have in international relations of national interest. Everybody pursues resource nationalism to the detriment of the collective good. And that's why I refer to the whole idea of regional integration and regional cooperation, because these minerals are not just in specific places. They're all over. They cross borders. And you can engage, because especially now, when you see the upsurge in resource nationalism, the companies, they don't leave. You would think that they would leave. But in the countries that are actually farmer in their own negotiations, the companies stay because the value is still profitable for them, even when the state gets greater benefit in contrast to what used to be the case. However, I think what is important is that in insisting on the framework that have been set, increasingly, African Union must have some kind of intergovernmental responsibility. And they cannot have that if states do not cede some of their own powers to that intergovernmental body to represent them in these negotiations. And mineral negotiations can be quite complex. You have lawyers that have expertise in this. We don't always have them. I mean, when I was minister, some of the contentious negotiations that we had, in fact, we had a King's College lawyer, Professor Ogoewo, who we used to consult on mining negotiations and agreements. And many of our countries, the negotiations actually take place in London and in Geneva and not necessarily on the ground. That's part of the problem. So it's an unequal relationship. So we need to empower people on the ground. We need more knowledge on these issues. We need more expertise on environmental management. In countries, I mean, we don't have to replicate exactly what happens. We can localize and adapt. But there are places that have extensive experience in this. Australia, for example. And we can benefit from such knowledge in order to design our own frameworks and implement it. But there are models that work and that will not shortchange the communities where these minerals are extracted from. And Jonathan, how do you bridge the chasm between the communities and government? You're absolutely right. I refer to a case in my speech about Zurich. Zurich has one of the richest lead endowments in Nigeria, in Plateau State. The same community where those 38 people died. I recall going there with the National Security Advisor when I was minister. And not only did we arrest those involved in mining there illegally, but how do you tell a local these minerals are in his community, in his domain? You have to find a way to bridge legal position with social goods. Because in many of our countries, you have situations in which the law really does not give ownership to the communities that own the resources. It is in the state. In some cases, it's in the national state, not the subnational, not to even talk of the community. And you always have to find a way to navigate that. Trust is always a deficit that we must address, but you can only address it when you are transparent in your approach.
Prof, do you mind that I cede a minute or so?
Sure.
Can I cede a minute or so to each to our colleagues? I know that there was an online question, and somebody is waving, a flag furiously at me that we have 60 seconds left. But Prof Akosua, do you want to respond very, very briefly? I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to anything you've just heard in a minute. I don't know whether can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I'll try and do it 60 seconds or under. And to say that I would like to respond to the comment or the question of stress systems and the fact that we keep putting it's definitely generally. But I'm also a pragmatist, and I realize that we operate in different systems. Some of our constitutions are better than others, some of our laws better than others. And from where I sit, civil society has a lot of work to do. And we have to, I mean, this is not forum to go into that, but to put civil society on the table and to Clement is leading will provide us with tools to engage with our different governments. And we need to be serious about using those tools and to show government that it works in their long-term interests. I know they generally think in 4 and 5 year electoral terms, but it works in their long-term, medium-term, and short-term interest to engage in these regional integration approaches. We may not have been successful with the African continental free trade nation and our civil society networks can show governments the benefits to them and to their people of these partnerships and how to do things better. And there have been examples in Ghana that have been done with renegotiations with Kaiser Aluminium, with bad deals that we had in the past. So I remain hopeful at some level that we can get there. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into that. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone as well.
Thank you so much. I know the network problems, and whatever it is, you were really quick overall. Thank you so much. Professor Sinclair?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I just want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert on the governance arrangements in Africa, to which many of the questions from the people present that was directed. But I would like to highlight what I consider a core truth on this subject in general, and that is that the clean energy transition has a dirty secret. And the language we use around the clean energy transition is often presented in a moral or ethical framework. The risk of that is that it can conveniently ignore some of the less beneficial impacts along the supply chain of critical minerals, for example. And in some cases, it may risk repeating or even exacerbating those historical damaging impacts, couched in this moral language of the need to achieve a clean energy transition. So I think a core challenge is to address that moral framing, if you like, of this problem, to expand it, to make sure it includes, does not ignore the impacts of those communities that are involved in or subject to locality-wise to the impacts of critical minerals mining. So that to me is a core challenge, that moral framing, which can use to justify inequities. We need to expand and expose and broaden that moral framing to include a just transition in communities around the world that are impacted by the mining.
Thank you so much. I think we have had a keynote with really deep insights, a real tour de force. You heard from the experiences across Africa, the minister's own experience. You heard our discussants bringing their knowledge from their own context to bear. And I want to thank everybody. Professor Fayemi, thank you so much to you. Prof. Akosua, thank you. Good to see you online again. Prof. Darren Sinclair, thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good evening or morning wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fumi Olusegun. Thank you very much, Professor Kayode Fayemi, and to Professor Okosia Adomako Ankoko, as well as Professor Darren Sinclair for their insights and their expertise. And for the second session of the evening, titled In Conversation, Indigenous Interdisciplinary Arts-Based Methods of Knowing, it is my pleasure to invite the Pew Marine Fellow and Lecturer in Sustainable Futures at the University of St. Andrews, Dr. Ifesinachi Okafor Yarwood, who will be introducing and chairing our next panel. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm really excited to be here and welcome you to the second panel discussion on methodological innovation. This panel focuses on methodological innovation, particularly bottom-up, acts-based, community-centered approaches that reveal hidden narratives and power dynamics in mineral governance and energy transitions. The panel brings together researchers, creative practitioners, and experts in indigenous and orature methodologies to discuss how qualitative, participatory, and culturally grounded tools can transform policy debates and reshape decision-making. And in the context of the conversation you've already heard, you really know that it is important that we have this kind of conversation about bottom approaches. The first panelist I'd like to introduce, and obviously because we don't have enough time, I'm just going to be brief in the introduction, is Dr. Michelle Wagola, who is an oratorist and performance scholar whose work uses storytelling, theater, and indigenous performance traditions to illuminate African histories, identities, and political transformations. She is also one of the project partners. She's joining us online. Hi, Dr. Michelle. The second panelist I'd like to introduce, who is also joining us online, is Dr. Andrea Monica de Ortiz, who is a Filipina interdisciplinary environmental scientist and associate professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Concepcion in Chile. She's also one of the project partners. Welcome. I'd like to also introduce Dr. Laura Gibson, who is here in the room, who is a lecturer in digital humanities at King's College London, where she convenes the MA in Digital Asset and Media Management. Do you want to join us, please? Please welcome to the stage. The next person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Aiko Ikemura, who is a lecturer in international development at King's College London, whose research explores the politics of indigeneity, gendered labor, and everyday urban transformations in Latin America. Welcome. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jerome Arab, who is an award-winning filmmaker, storyteller, and creative entrepreneur, serving as a visiting creative fellow at King's College London. Welcome. Without further ado, because I know we don't have enough time and you have so many questions to ask, I'd like to invite our panelists who have 7 minutes. Yeah, 7 minutes each, but if you can make it brief, that's fine, to respond to different questions. I will start with Dr. Michelle. And my question to you is, your expertise in orator highlights the role of performance, storytelling, and embodied knowledge. How can orator reveal community aspirations or grievances in ways conventional research methods cannot, especially in the context of critical mineral governance? Can you hear me? Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Welcome. If you heard the question, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. And let me just quickly say what a joy and a privilege it is to be part of this conversation and to be part of this project. And with all protocols observed, let me go straight to the question so I don't exceed my time. And I just want to briefly just start with the definition so that when I say performance, when I think of performance, I'm thinking of artistic performance, but going on that to all the different ways, the range of ways in which human beings think on issues such as critical mineral governance. Okay, so what do we know as a result? How do the ways we think help us come up with the what we know and what happens as a result of this knowledge, right? So whether we're using materials, whether we're embodying it in our bodies, whether we are creating environments which help people know better, that entire range of ways. So when we talk about conventional research methods, which are what we use as a norm as academics or when we're working in policy spaces, clearly these will encompass just a fraction of the entire range of ways in which people make meaning as human beings, which means that what we engage as a result is severely limited. So I think in these two projects, let me speak to just two ways in which we hope foregrounding orature or performance will enrich the work that we do. First of all, we want to open up the research project, move into the space that the people we are working with are comfortable with in the ways that they make knowledge, using their processes, using their products, and trying to understand what is the meaning they are deriving out of these processes, as well as what meaning we ourselves process. So what we hope this will bring to the research project is a serious engagement with knowledge processes and products that are normally ignored, that are marginalized, or when you're thinking about countries like Chile or Ghana or Australia that are thought of as adding color or spice or character or making the research more sexy, but really treating them seriously as we treat the conventional academic or policy ways of research. And then related to what was said in the keynote, which I found, and the discussion with the panelists, which I found very interesting, which also echoes some of the conversation yesterday, thinking about the question of sovereignty when it comes to who is centered in discourses on critical mineral governance, who is centered in processes, what are their responsibilities, what are their rights, what spaces can they enter. I think there is a way in which conventional research methods center us as researchers, academic or policy researchers, our policies, our priorities, our agendas, our questions, the ways of making meaning that we are comfortable with. However, if we extend our investment on the question of justice, which is at the heart of this research, if we extend it to the processes themselves, to the ways we work with the people that we work, then using orature invites the communities we are working with to be centered in the process so that they can embrace the research process for their own priorities and agendas, so that they can shape and influence everything from the questions we ask through the stages of how we do things up to what we do with the research project, so that at the end of the day, the project isn't just a space to articulate their grievances and aspirations so that we can use that, but it becomes a vessel for them to do their own research, to further their own exploration and the knowing of the terrain that is critical mineral governance.
All right, thank you so much for that apt response. I like how you makes reference to the methodology recentering the right holders and in essence walking the talk on what justice entails, and this aligns with what we've heard from the keynote session we've had previously, so thank you. My next question then goes to Aiko. From a development perspective, how do you see interdisciplinary and community-centered methodologies reshaping our understanding of justice in mineral governance?
Thank you very much. I would like also to thank you for the invitation, Clement. It's such a pleasure to be here. Such an excellent panel. I'm sorry I was late. So when I received this prompt, the first thing that I was thinking about is to what extent are affected communities participating in the definition of governance, of mineral governance, and I thought it very little. Although I'm not a scholar of mineral governance or extraction, I am a mineira, right? So I come from a state called Minas Gerais in Brazil, which literally translates as the general mines. And it's been part of my personal experience to be at the limits of extraction, but also thinking about development that is always in the future, where the materiality of extraction is very much in the present, right? And part of that, it means that the effects of mining is very much embedded in the livelihoods and the hopes that people share in every day. But I was not invited to talk about my experience as a person, although my experience as a researcher is very much weaved into my personal experiences. And I thought that participatory methodologies and interdisciplinary research approaches have, I would like to highlight three main contributions to think about justice in mineral governance. And I start by thinking about the plurality of conceptions of justice, particularly working with Indigenous peoples. We have to come to the understanding that the way that justice is framed, particularly in international development and development industry more broadly, but also by corporate responsibility speech, it's generally very much technical or one-sided or limited to particular or very particular frameworks that ignore how justice is actually lived in plural ways. So one of the ways that these community center approaches, for example, one of our colleagues in the department, postdoctoral researcher, Rafael Shukuru Cariri, an indigenous scholar, highlights how different indigenous groups in Brazil understand justice very differently, but they are united in the understanding that political and economic elites have colluded in order to exploit indigenous lands and resources, lands that are usually understood as seminal or integral to their own identities and sense of community, right? So indigenous participatory methodologies are crucial to be able to review and address systemic injustices that have been usually characterized these forms of knowledge and understanding of justice as illegitimate or less valid. Secondly, and related to that, because these people have been also exploited and their labor inclusive and in lands, they also need to be able to find redress, reparation, and redistribution through systems of mineral governance. Research can actually contribute to outline together with these communities what their priorities are. And I think that Dr. Mishai's point highlighted that very much importantly, that they must be defining the priorities and how these processes should actually redress and what reparation actually means to them. Finally, and also connecting the 2 points above, participatory and community-based research can actually lead or offer and serve as platforms for mobilization and for producing material that can be used to mobilize, transpose differences, and also visibilize the claims and demands of Indigenous peoples or other peoples affected by mining. And so one of my friends from the undergraduate, Dr. Daniela Pauliello, works with a team to record through videos, interviews, and photographs the effects of tail dams ruptures in Brazil. So these is very much important for these people to understand that they live constantly, not only with the promise of development, but with the very ugly or dirty outcomes of transformation at one point was also deemed to be critical to humankind, modernity, development, all of these promises that have been embedded with mineral extraction. Just to highlight something that I'm at the end now, I think I was highlighting a lot of redressing, but justice cannot be only happening when, I was going to say a bad word, but when problems hit the fence. So I think that it's very important that we think prospectively and we incorporate those definitions of justice before we actually get the hands on. And finally, research does nothing if there is no power behind it to enact change. So we can be doing a lot of very good research, but if the political and economic elites are not very interested in taking them forward, there's not much that community-based initiatives can do, although they have done a lot in several places. But yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you so much for your response. I see an emerging theme in the response that you gave with what Dr. Michelle also talked about, especially in relation to the importance of collaborative research and re-empowering communities, not only to shape the definition or understanding of justice, but also owning the data, understanding the process, and hopefully in the long run would contribute to the impact which you seek to make. You fly back to Keynes. They have this wealth of knowledge which they can use to engage their government with. So thank you so much. My next question then would be to Laura. Digital humanities approaches often surface hidden narratives through technology and archival work. How can digital tools support the documentation and interpretation of community voices and silences around mineral extraction?
Thank you. And just to echo the panelists, thank you, Clement, for inviting me. It's been really inspiring to learn more about the project. Certainly, digital humanities approaches and digital tools have been celebrated for their ability to surface hidden narratives. So to recover voices, to reveal absences, and make marginalized histories more visible. But I think it's important also to reframe some of the grounds of that discussion by asking the question of what do we imagine the digital to be in all of this as well. And we so frequently speak about the digital as if it was something immaterial. So it exists as something weightless in a virtual realm in the cloud. But as we know from our discussions today, digital technologies and tools are deeply material. They depend on critical minerals, they depend on extraction, on energy, on labor, and these vast physical infrastructures. And that's particularly significant when we're talking about extraction, because the tools, digital tools we're using to document, to analyze, to represent extraction, or to document feelings about them are themselves products of this extractive process. So the digital isn't this neutral medium through which we can observe extraction or document it. It's already deeply entangled within it. And recognizing that does complicate how we think about inequality as well. So those material supply chains of digital technologies, like those of mining, are unevenly distributed across the globe, as our keynote panel made clear. Some regions, the Democratic Republic of Congo, provide resources and absorb those environmental costs, whilst others, Silicon Valley, accumulate those technological advantages. So digital worlds are experienced with profoundly unequal consequences. If we foreground this digital materiality, I think it also pushes us to rethink what we understand by agency as well. Many of our intellectual traditions that we work within, particularly in the university spaces, carry a European Enlightenment influenced assumption that agency rests and resides primarily in humans, and that we use technology as a tool. We have the actor as being the human, but perspectives emerging from post-humanism, new materialism, and particularly indigenous knowledge systems encourage us to see this agency as something much more distributed, as emerging across networks of humans, environments, infrastructures, and these much more than human worlds. And certainly research that I've conducted with communities in South Africa suggests that agency is much more complex than an anthropocentric approach allows. And I think this shift matters enormously when we talk about voices and about silences as well and what we're documenting. Discussions of extraction, of course, prioritize human experience, so testimony, memory, resistance, and survival. But extraction is, of course, experienced by landscapes, water systems, ecosystems, and more than human worlds that don't always register easily within representational frameworks. I think there are shifts there, legal systems that are beginning to recognize more than human actors as having agency. So in the past few years, in New Zealand, the Wanganui River has been given legal status so that if this is harmed, if it's overfished or polluted, it's recognized as harming the entire community. Similarly, in Ecuador, forests have been given certain legal rights. Attempts have been made in the United States of America, although with less success. But I think what this asks us to recognize is that if voice is imagined exclusively as a human expression, then silence perhaps also becomes narrowly defined as this absence of human speech. And what we might want to think about as well is that silence could point to something else, which is the limits of our conceptual and methodological frameworks in many instances. And I think that's going to be pushed by this research as well for us to think about innovative ways of approaching the research so that we reveal what our systems are perhaps not designed to perceive in the first place. So if we adopt this more sort of materially attentive perspective, invites us to not just ask whose voices are missing, but what kinds of agencies, what kinds of relations and forms of presence or representational tools systematically exclude. And this leads on to documentation practices. How do we use these tools and approaches to document voices and silences? And of course, the digital tools don't just record knowledge, they organize and structure it as well. So all of our databases, our metadata schemas, interfaces, categories that we're using within those embed assumptions about what counts as knowledge, what deserves visibility, and then how the world is divided into these meaningful units. And of course, these categories aren't neutral. Again, my research with colonial archives and ethnographic museum collections in South Africa make this point. Decisions about what to collect, what to document, what to catalogue, about whose names are included in those records, whose aren't incidental. They're decisions about creating a very particular knowledge system. So if digital documentation inherits those logics shaped by colonial histories or these anthropocentric approaches, then we risk stabilizing these old patterns of visibility, even whilst we're seeking to challenge them. So it's not just that silences are discovered, they can be produced and reproduced, stabilized through those very tools. So digital tools, not just mechanisms for revealing hidden narratives, but important sites for ontological and political decisions where they are continuously made. Where certain forms of life, relation, and agency become legible while others remain articulated. And I think that's something to keep in mind through those methodologies. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for your detailed response. Your response made me think about digital divide and inequities. I like that you talked about how people, different people, communities experience digital materiality differently. And I like the fact that the transdisciplinary nature of this research allows to address some of these inequities that you're talking about, and hopefully this research would absolutely address. My next question then goes to Monica, who is online.
Yes,
Can
hello.
you hear me? Great.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Your environmental science expertise intersects closely with communities and mining affected communities. How do scientific data and community narratives converge or clash when assessing justice in mineral extraction?
Yes. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you as well for the invitation. Congratulations, Clement. I wish I could, as I mentioned in my email, I wish I could be there for the nibbles. We're missing out on that being online. You might wonder what a Filipino is doing in Chile, but that's a story for another time. But we have many common threads, and I think listening to everyone here on the panel and the keynote speech, we have a lot of these same threads of the shadow and presence of colonialism in a lot of territories, in the communities that are affected by mining, and not only mining, but many extractive industries. And so here in Chile, I'll just give a bit of context before I address the question directly. Chile holds about 30% of the lithium reserves of the world. And lithium is extracted primarily through brine. And so it's saying that lithium is water. In Chile, when you extract or produce or mine lithium, you're extracting water. And for the communities in where lithium does occur, this is in the driest desert in the world. It's in the Atacama, in what they call the lithium triangle between Bolivia, between Chile and Argentina. And so at its root, lithium extraction, lithium mining, lithium production in Chile is deeply territorial and it's deeply personal to the identities of people who have such an intricate relationship, intermeshed and deep relationship with water, its absence and its presence in the territory. And so thinking about the question about, does scientific data dialogue with this kind of knowledge? Does it dialogue with biocultural memory? On one side, science might be able to document, yes, the aquifers have been reduced, yes, the water levels are being reduced, the glaciers are going, but without indigenous knowledge, and here speaking about the Atacameño people or the Licanantay people, without meaning, without their spirituality, without their memory, that data is just numbers, and it fails to show the reality of the lived experiences of these communities. And it also fails to show how much agency they've had living in such extreme conditions since time immemorial, at least for as far as we know, in terms of documented communities in this region. And so going towards the question, I think there's been a lot of work. I can think of the work of Maria Tengo in weaving knowledges and epistemic justice. And I think science has been making the efforts to reach out to traditional ecological knowledge. It has been making the effort to reach out to indigenous and local knowledges. However, we also know that this has been reduced greatly to tokenism and integrating it as kind of spread on top of what is actually very deep personal and relational values with nature. And so in some of the work that we're doing, we're emphasizing the idea of weaving knowledges and bringing more epistemic justice where there's no hierarchy between local knowledge and scientific data. And in the context of the community that's deeply affected by lithium production in Chile, they've taken that agency and they've formed their own Unidad de Medio Ambiente, which means an environment unit. And they have professionals trained in the environmental sciences doing water quality monitoring, doing water level monitoring. And that evidence produced by the indigenous community has been taken into consideration into state-led decisions. Lithium is a very, very knotted topic in Chile, and who owns it and what percentage is owned by the state. So I'm going very kind of the glaze on this donut here. But just to say that that's also another important question. Why is it that we need to legitimize indigenous memory, indigenous knowledge to make it valuable for the state to listen? And so I think that's where the work of this project of Clement and the silences and the voices is deeply interesting. And I want to add to this mix of different themes also the silence of nature, bringing here to the forefront the work of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. We are seeing the extinction of species, the loss of habitat, and it's not being heard apart from the indigenous and local communities that see and live these experiences every day. So I think as Laura mentioned in the previous intervention or the answer to the question, the creation of silences also indicates something that we are not bringing to the table, that we are not sharing these knowledges and doing the knowledge weaving that gives justice to indigenous peoples and local communities' lived experiences. So I'm hoping that with this project led by Clement and with partners from different communities, different territories, different contexts, we're very interested and excited about working together to weave those knowledges together and in the context of social and ecological justice. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica. I absolutely loved that you brought up the topic of two eyes seeing, which more or less acknowledges indigenous science, or more or less tries to bring indigenous science together with modern science, understanding that the knowledge that indigenous and local peoples hold are relevant. And hopefully, again, with the application of the research, we can walk the talk on decolonizing research, as is quite common in this part of the world where we talk about it a lot. And what does it even mean? So hopefully, Clement, to answer that question. My final question then is to Jerome. What responsibilities do artists bear when collaborating with communities affected by resource extraction especially when representing trauma, conflict, and loss?
What? I got 2 minutes, people. So, in other words, yeah, don't mind the creative. We'll just put that to the side. Okay. So the responsibilities of the artist, it's the same. It's the responsibilities of the researcher, the responsibilities of the politician. First, I'll start with recognition. Can the community recognize themselves in what you're doing? So are they in the conversation? When we put a piece together and I think about it, I'm always saying, can you guys see yourselves in the documentary I'm making? Is this your story? Another thing when I think about it in the African context is when we're filming in Lilai Lodge, walking through the forest, all of the names first had the Latin connotation before the African. That's a problem. That's a problem because where are we? We're placing ourselves second. But the tree was named there. It was named before that Latin name reached. Names carry substance. So if we can look at that and look at who we are and start at that place first and start with the fact that we have knowledge to give and they have knowledge to give, they are co-creators. We're stepping in one direction. So that's why I would say as an artist, that's the first R of responsibilities of an artist. The second R is return. I mean, we've heard it said in multiple different forms, but how does it flow back into that community? Is it in finances? Is it in impact? Is it a hospital? Is it a school? What's going back to that? So there has to be an element of return. Whether you're a researcher, as I said, an artist, politician, doesn't matter. And the last R is restraint. And that's something that I've not heard much today. If it does not work for the community, it should not be there. If I'm telling a story and it does not fit, and I see something wrong in it, and they see something wrong in it, having the audacity to say, I may be wrong and I'm not going to do that. If our politicians took that position and said, we're going to exercise restraint, we're not going to say yes to this deal because look at all the zeros on the end of those figures. If they looked at their people and seen the damage it was doing in that environment, whether it's lithium mining, whether it's copper, as we've seen with the spill that took place in the Kafue River in in the northern parts of Zambia, if we exercised restraint more often, I don't think we'd be in this position that we're in now. So those are the 3 R's I think everyone should be exercising when they're dealing with communities: recognition, return, and restraint.
Thank you so much for your response. I love the 3 R's: recognition, return, and restraint. And that actually encapsulates what this collaborative approach to doing research and hopefully the outcome that Clemens and the partners' research would bring forth, I guess, as the years proceed. So thank you so much. On that note, I want to open the floor to questions. Okay, can you say your name and where you're from, and then make your question very concise. If possible, tell us who it's directed to.
Hi, my name is Francisca. Hi, my name is Francisca. I'm a PhD candidate here at King's in the law school, and I am researching about the governance of the lithium triangle. I'm from Chile as well. Hola, Monica. And my question is about your concept of justice. Can we make a universal abstract concept of justice? I understand after this panel that you are trying to co-create from bottom up a conception of justice, but what if that conception of justice of local communities put at risk fragile environments and ecosystems that can be destroyed?
Who are you directing the question to?
Who is your
Sorry. It's an online question.
Okay. Is it clear who it's directed to? Can you let us know as well?
This is not very clear who it's directed to, but I'm happy to just read it.
Okay, no.
Okay.
All right.
Canada has begun consulting with Indigenous communities in recent years through a legislative process, especially in British Columbia, as it relates to critical minerals. This has allowed Indigenous communities to be part of the decision-making process with the support of government. Because of this, we now have Indigenous groups in direct partnership with industry. Has this style of framework been considered? And this is from Victoria Collins.
Okay, thank you. All right, is there any other question? Okay, yeah. Oh, okay, final question, yeah.
Hi, thank you everyone. Amazing presentation. I stood up automatically because I'm kind of short. So thank you for all of your presentations. I have two questions and I promise they're super short. My first one is, we saw in the case of Bolivia how the Aymara people did marches and were able to establish a plurinational constitution and even had the Pachamama, the environment, respected at the constitutional level. However, today there's a lot of conversation about how the movement has been co-opted. So I want to ask you, how can we engage with Indigenous peoples in a way that is not co-opting their knowledge or distorting their message? Then my question is to the artists. Thank you. I think art is always at the center of resistance. And as someone who works a lot with Indigenous artists, many of them have spoken about the dual burden of being seen as ones almost expected to preserve tradition and expected to preserve marginalized memories, but also the revolutionary expectation to transform the status quo. So I wanted to ask you as an artist, how can you balance these competing aims, and are they competing? And thank you.
All right, thank you. I wanna I apologize for this, but I wonder if Monica, you can answer the first question just to make it clear, and then the second question can be answered by anyone, with the final question being answered by Jerome.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. Buenas tardes, buenas noches desde Chile. I think it's a very relevant question about how we define justice. And off the top of my head, I think that most of us here on the panel and in the room would probably say that there is no one fit all definition of justice. Obviously, it's very contextual. It's very dependent on history, on relationships, on meaning, and understanding what kind of political environments that these communities are operating in. What is reachable, what is just, what is distributional justice and all the different forms of justice, and what is social ecological justice. So I think you made a very good point. What if a community, wherever it may be, decides that justice for them does not include consideration of nature, does not consider protection of nature? And we worked with colleagues where that is the case, for example, because I'm affiliated with an ecological institute where the arrival of an invasive species is considered by some communities as they are guests. They are visiting guests from different parts and they are visiting our ecosystems. And it's quite rude to throw out your guests in some context if you have an invasive species. Oh, look, we have a visitor. And so I think while we can agree, and I think there are many frameworks thinking about the international frameworks on justice, I think the definition of justice is very contextualized, and I think placing or reaching towards a singular definition will leave different worldviews out, will leave different experiences out, and also is unjust in a way because it coming to an agreement, given all our different trajectories and the shadow of colonialism in many of these communities, I think would be unjust to try and impose a definition of justice, which is not what I think you're suggesting, but it's a very nuanced discussion that is place-based and contextualized.
Thank you so much for that response. I'd like to invite Dr. Michai to answer the second question about Canada. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think actually, in a way that's just also just the same question in the sense that I think there'll be always different frameworks based on the different countries. I thought that was a really fascinating example. And I think one of the things that we hoped to do by engaging such different countries countries and spaces is to begin to think about how people, and going back to what I was saying, you may have the frameworks, but then the question of how were those frameworks developed, who was in the room, what processes were used to develop them. Back to the question of concepts. How did people understand the concepts that were going in? I've been really interested in finding out how the different communities will define, when you talk about critical minerals, what does critical minerals mean to them? Who is critical? Who is it critical for? For some of us, we might say these are critical minerals. For them, they might say, there are other things that are more critical to us. And because you've put value on these minerals, there's something you're doing that is actually taking away from what is truly important to us. So I think this question of are there different frameworks? We're at the beginning of the research. I think one of the things that will be very interesting is to go into the very different countries. I know Kenya best, but Kenya is not one of the countries that we're studying. I come from a community where critical minerals is one of the big political issues of the day, and communities are getting very exercised about them because the government is making certain decisions, is passing laws, is passing policies. But when they are doing that, they bring a few selected elders and politicians into the room. So I think one of the big things that this project offers us is an example to look at countries like Canada, which are not part of the project, but also to look at the three countries that we're working in and the communities that we're working with, and then to use those as models to begin to think across different spaces, so that while we be looking at the specificities of those countries and the specificities of the communities we're engaging, hopefully that enables us to have a bigger conversation on what is happening across the globe. And then this just becomes the beginning of a conversation. I don't know if this is helps in answering your question.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for your response. And finally, Jerome, the response to the last question.
So I'm going to start with a simple comment about, I've got a taxi analogy I use when I'm coaching people, whether they're athletes or executives. You'll never get in a taxi and say, take me to a big house. You've got your postcode and you know exactly where you're going. And purpose is the thing that I would lean on in everything that we're doing, whether it's politics or whether it's art. What's your purpose? You have to define what success looks like to you before you take the first step. Otherwise, you'll get dragged in multiple directions and you'll look back at yourself and not see yourself in that thing. There'll be no recognition in it. So as an artist, you always start there. I always recommend that with everyone. Start with what your purpose is. Define it. Make sure that vision is clear. And then don't now take that parasitic egg and start to nest it as if it's your own, First identify that, and then it's easy for you to make those decisions of whether you're going to forge ahead and paint the future or document the present or talk about the past. It's all up to you, but you have to make that decision. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. It's really been a joy facilitating this, but of course, we're not going to go without inviting our speakers to give us the final perspective on this, just 1 minute each, to give us a final thought on what you think. So maybe we can start with Laura, and then we go from there.
Thank you.
Very,
very quickly. So thank you. And I think what's been fascinating is how we're all coming from different places, different disciplines, and yet those themes of colonialism have come up time and again, of thinking about more than human, whichever discipline we're coming from, and that those remain extremely important. And I'm just going to say I'm really looking forward to how the research progresses and seeing that. So thank you for letting me be part of it now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Aiko?
Right. I'd just like to highlight that also kind of trying to answer a little bit of the questions is that first, Indigenous people are many people, and definitions of justice being plural means that sometimes they can be ambiguous, they can contradict themselves, and they cannot necessarily mean what we expect them to think, because that would also be infantilizing particular perspectives and judging that we have the power to decide what people want. People face several forms of injustice, and in their everyday lives, they try to come across and fight against it in several ways. So I think that's important for us to, if we want to truly value community knowledge, community perspectives, and their understanding of what they expect mineral extraction to bring to them or not, we must actually be ready to deal with this kind of incongruencies that we find difficult to deal with.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you again, Jerome. 1 minute, please.
First, thank you again for having me here. I think last thing I would lean on is with all these communities, we must remember dignity can't be measured on a Likert scale, you know. So we need all forms. We need all forms present. We need the researchers, we need the videographers, we need everybody to participate. We need the artists. No one is more important than the other. And that's something I think we have to embed into the core of what we're doing from here onwards, is we are all equal, we're all co-creators, the community included. And I think that's where I would leave it.
Thank you so much. Michelle? Michelle, sorry.
That's all right. And thank you so much. I think I want to echo I think I'd like to echo what everybody has said. I think for me, what is most exciting about this project is the opportunity it offers, especially those of us who are researchers, to understand the importance of the work that is needed to be translators. And translators in the sense that there is so much for us to learn. There are so many ways of making meaning and of working with communities, but also with policy actors and those, we have a power to mediate, not in the sense of that we know more, but to invest in the time that it takes to learn from both groups and to bring them into conversation with each other in ways that sometimes seem difficult from both sides. So I'm hoping that through this process, we will learn a lot, and those who we work with on both sides of the equation will also learn a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Monica, finally, your thoughts.
Yes. Yes, I'm holding back between the nibbles. So thank you very much again for the invitation. It's a privilege to be part of such a diverse group of scholars. I think the only thing occurring to me right now at this moment is the title of a book of Arturo Escobar, which is Whose Knowledge and Whose Nature? And so I'm hoping that this project allows for that plurality of knowledge, that plurality of vision, the plurality of voices, to imagine alternative development, alternative territories to what seems to be a very imposing status quo of mining impacts and lithium and these crushing transformations to communities that have such deep relationships with nature. So I'm very keen on seeing the project progress, and thank you again.
Thank you again. And I want to invite you all to please give a round of applause to the president. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Can we get another round of applause for this amazing thought-provoking comments as well? And as we head to a close, I would like to invite Professor Franz Berkut, Assistant Principal, King's Climate and Sustainability, who will speak to us about King's Climate and Sustainability as it relates to Future Leaders Fellowship. Thank you.
Is this working? Is this working? Yes. I'll be brief. So it's been really fascinating this evening. So I lead on sustainability at King's College. I'm also a professor in the geography department, and I work on climate change and energy transitions. King's Climate and Sustainability gave Clement a little bit of money through a seed fund. And so it's a real joy, some time ago, 18 months ago, it's a real joy to see a small idea flowering into this wonderful project. And it's been a privilege to listen to everyone speaking here today, and looking forward, I think, to the work that's going to happen across 3 continents. It's a very ambitious and interesting project, and all the best of luck. I also want to pay tribute to the African leadership and, of course, the leadership of Fumi Oloni Shaki, You know, that environment that's created Clement and the ideas, absolutely wonderful and essential part of King's and what we can do here. I want to thank, of course, Professor Fayemi for a wonderful talk, a really fascinating insight into policy making and the dilemmas and difficulties, and of course all the panel members with their fascinating, really fascinating interventions. It's a very broad project. It's dealing with a whole series of quite complex ideas, and knitting them together will be fascinating. For me, I suppose the takeaway is really that I think this project is about, in the end, framing justice, a sort of plural notion of justice. Justice as the start point for agency. Agency amongst communities that are affected by mining, and certainly in the case of Latin America and Africa, of trying to capture agency in a broader level, control over supply chains, over technologies, and so on. And agency starts though with a sort of narrative, or what you called hermeneutical justice. It starts with being able to name things in a particular way, have them experienced as true, have them experienced as a description of reality, and of rights and needs and so on. So I think that's the fascinating methodological step you've taken in this project, is to make it about something quite esoteric, critical minerals and justice, but starting with the question of how is that defined, how is it talked about, how is it identified through the way people speak about it in plural ways and sometimes contradictory ways and so on. Starting there seems to me to be the opposite route to the way we normally start with these questions, and I think it bodes incredibly well for the research, but also the potential impact of this project. So all I want to say, Clement, is, and the whole team online and everywhere, good luck with this. It's going to be great to see the virtual research, and I look forward to it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Professor. And in closing, lastly, I will now invite Dr. Shabai Usman Muni, Executive Director of the African Leadership Center, to provide closing remarks.
Thank you. For fear of Dr. Andrea invoking the nibbles again, I won't take long, and I'm not making closing remarks. I'm simply thanking people and I think congratulating my brother Clement on this, what sounds like a very fascinating project. I'm sure many of you have a lot going around in your minds, and some of you may be trying to place certain things. I think I also want to encourage you not to despair. I think that's exactly what Clement and everyone we heard from today intended. But also it just exemplifies how broad and how rich and how dynamic this project is. But also, most importantly, I think what everyone has tried to do, right from the keynote speaker, to emphasize that this project is about people, is about lived realities, about those who are affected by, as what many have said, what we hear as critical. And what does it really mean for the lives of those affected? So I just want to say congratulations. I want to also share that this project is really important for us at the African Leadership Center. We just entered a new strategic period at the end of 2025 for the next 10 years. And one of our strategic priorities is inspiring new thinking through producing and using Afro-centered multidimensional knowledges. And I think this project exemplifies that very directly. So allow me to thank everyone, and I want to just name all the people we've heard from today, and to thank you very much for your inputs. In no particular order. No, actually, I will start with Clement himself. So thank you, Clement, again, and congratulations, and thank you for gathering us all here. I would also like to thank our keynote speaker, Professor Kayode Fayemi. Thank you very much. Professor Fumi Olonishakin, Professor Franz Burkhout, thank you very much. Prof. Kathy McElwain, I don't know if she's still in the room. Yes, thank you very much. Professor Eka Ikpe, Dr. Ifesinachi Okafor Yarwood, Dr. Laura Gibson, Dr. Aiko Ikemura Amaral, Jerome Arab, thank you very much. Professor Akoswa, Adomako Popo, thank you very much. I'm not sure if you're still online. Prof. Darren Sinclair, Dr. Mushai Mangola, and of course, Dr. Andrea Monica Ortiz. Thank you very much to you all. I hope I haven't left anyone out in naming people specifically. It's been wonderful to be with you all. And please, you're very welcome to refreshments. As Clement said, the project might be extended up to 7 years, but at least for the next 4 years, please do engage in every opportunity that there is with this project. Once again, congratulations, Clement, and thank you, everyone.